In this Microsoft Teams Insider podcast, we have friend of the show, Michael Tressler. I'm pretty sure everybody in the community knows Michael either from his time at Microsoft or his YouTube channel or his globetrotting at various events. In this pod, we did something a bit different. I wanted to get the whole backstory on Michael, kind of the pre-Microsoft days, how he ended up at Microsoft, what he was doing, and then how he's moved on to Jabra and what he's doing today. Thanks very much to Jabra for being the sponsor of this podcast. Really appreciate their support with Empowering Cloud. And thanks to Michael for taking the time to give us the full backstory. I hope you enjoy it. On with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to the pod. Really excited for this one. Got a good friend who's promised to do a big life story reveal on the podcast. So things you've never heard before from the man that is Michael Tressler. Hey Michael, do you just want to say hello?
I just want to say hello. Are we done now?
We're done. We can call it a day. That's it.
Sweet. All right. Good seeing you again, Tom.
Everybody listening to this pod, because it's basically the community, probably know the name, know the face, but give us some background pre-Microsoft, the Microsoft role, and how you've now ended up at Jabra.
Very hard in my life to go back pre-Microsoft. Let's go all the way back. So I was 12-ish, and my dad bought me a Tandy RadioShack TRS-80 Model 3. It was an all-in-one with an external tape drive, and I didn't want it. I wanted the Tandy color computer, which my friend had, because it has better games. When you're 12, that is key. My dad decided, you're going to be a businessman one day, and so you need a business computer. I'm like, no, 12-year-old, just life advice for fathers and mothers. Never buy your kid a business device when they're 12. However, on that, I learned BASIC on there. Program, remember that track and field game where you hit the buttons real fast?
Oh, yeah.
It goes faster, and the faster you hit it, and then there was the advanced one, you hit the button, you could hurdle. Coded that using, the Z and X key, and then the computer would randomly move between 1 and 3 squares, because they're pixels, come on, squares, 1 to 3 squares, and then I could make it harder, and as I got faster at pounding those buttons, the computer would then go between 2 and 3 squares a random number of times, right? Not a lot of logic there, but I could then play against the computer. So I coded that. There are the magazines that had all the code written in the back, so you type those in manually, painstakingly, but you're 12. What else do you do? So you're 12, so you type those in, they don't work. Syntax error. You don't know what syntax error means. You don't know where the mistake is. Syntax error means something's wrong. I don't know what. I give up.
Yeah, somewhere in the last hour you spent typing, one of those characters is wrong. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. So then you go back painstakingly, and then you learn troubleshooting. Hey, I'm going to pause the code here and see if I get an error. Because the great thing about BASIC is it just goes down the line, more or less. Anyway, then computer science, my computer class in high school. Went to college for international business, so Dad was right. Went for international business, and back then, because I'm old, this is 1990, I switched to computer science. Software engineering was the only track at Ball State University. Mighty Ball State, the home of David Letterman and Jim Davis, the guy who draws Garfield. Two comedians, essentially, are the most famous people from my alma mater. So computer science, that was the only option was coding. So I learned C++ and then got exposed to Lisp and COBOL and Fortran and all those classic old languages. By the way, I believe Microsoft wrote the BASIC on the Tandy RadioShack. I'm on a Commodore 128 at this point, so I have way upgraded. So like Commodore 128, still programming BASIC, which I believe was also provided by Microsoft. So again, it's hard to separate me from Microsoft when you go back to my first computer, to my second computer, the Commodore 128. So at the beginning of my coding career, learning, I would write everything out in BASIC, and I think early Visual Basic at that point, just to get the algorithm straight and then convert it to C. It's learning a language where you hear it, you convert it to English, and then think what sentence you're going to say back in English and then say it in German. And grammatical errors, but slow, but you did respond mostly accurately. So I'd write it in BASIC, figure out the basic, how the algorithm's going to work, then convert to C++. Towards the end, I was able to think in C++, so just do it natively as I got comfortable with it. Anyway, got out of college. Oh, and by the way, in college, the thing I always liked the most, which I never had because there was no networking class, there was no IT class, there was no anything but programming. So what I liked the most, or was most intrigued by, was how are these like DEC terminals connected to the VAX on the back end? So how do these Unix terminals connect to the internet? How does the email, the username, and all that, how does that connect with each other? That was always a little more interesting to me, but there was no curriculum in that. So at that point, I would have had to have volunteered at the computer lab and then maybe worked my way up to learn that. But I would rather drink, so I didn't volunteer my time. Got out of college, first job was at a small AutoCAD reseller called CAD Cam Plus in Carmel, Indiana. and I know nothing about sales. I did get one one sales lesson. That is when the customer says, I'm willing to buy, or I'm ready to buy, or who do I ship my PO? Who gets my cash? Shut up. Say thank you and take the money. Because all you can do now is talk them out of the sale. Example being like, oh my God, Empowering Cloud, they're great. Thank you so much for being a subscriber. There's so many things coming up in the future. We've had some problems with our URL redirects, and some of our contributors aren't contributing much, but trust me, we'll get that figured out. What?
Classic technologist oversharing.
Wait, hold on. Maybe I want to give you the money in 6 months once you've fixed this. Like, why am I giving it to you now? So that's the one lesson I still through to today. Like, when I sold my house in Indianapolis and moved to Nashville, Tennessee, at the closing, I was probably the biggest jerk because I said nothing.
I'm only going to cause trouble if I talk.
Because all I can do is talk them out. Hey, yeah, the house is great. The windows are crap, though. that one window sticks. This light switch, if you can ever figure out what it does, I don't know what it does. You really need to put some insulation underneath the floor in the master bedroom because it gets really cold in winter. Like, next thing, you're trying to be helpful. Next thing you know, they're going, wait a second. We haven't not signed the papers yet. Checks have not traded hands. So I was just being quiet, just cordial but quiet. Yes, no. So, did you like the house? Loved it. That's it.
Yeah.
Boom, done. They probably thought I was like, this guy's just, he's boring. Who's this guy we're buying this house off of? I'm like, I'm not losing this sale. I need to get this house sold. I now am paying for 2 places, a place in Nashville and my mortgage in Indianapolis. So we got to get this going. Anyway, joined CAD CAM Plus, did inside sales. And during the downtime, 2 of the coworkers I worked with were former DEC, digital equipment. They were direct in line with digital equipment. They got us an early alpha, forget the exact model number, DEC alpha, and we threw Windows NT 3.1 on it. So I would go downstairs and just bang away at it, learn it, Windows NT 3. And I already knew Windows. Oh, by this time I had upgraded to a 486 DX250 with
not the 100. You struggled on with the 50.
8 meg of RAM. And a 210 gig Connor hard drive, I believe, were the specs on that. So I've been using Windows there. I worked at the Ball State Police Station. They had Windows 2.0, which is the first and only time I've ever seen that. Anyway, so I learned Windows NT 3.1. And at this point then, those guys were like, he's way too technically sharp and he's a terrible salesperson. They started sending me out on jobs. So at that point, it was installing Lantastic, if we all remember that. It was a great peer-to-peer networking up to about 30 people, and you get to the 31st person and the whole thing crashes. The whole network it comes to a halt. So they needed a solution that could get beyond that problem. Also, CAD files are big. They are today. They were doubly so in 1993 or 1994. We didn't have a Novell person on staff. It was me, the only person who knew Windows NT and Windows. So we sold a few. A couple of people bought off on Windows NT 3.1 as the file and print server, and Windows 3.1.1 or Windows for Workgroups. And so again, Microsoft, you can't get me away from Microsoft. You can fast forward a bunch, Windows NT 3.1, Windows NT 3.5.1. I started getting good at TCP/IP. Wrote a chapter in this book. Let me get it real quick. There you go, Tom. Here's your insider exclusive.
See, I knew you did your book, but I didn't know about this one. That's cool.
Windows NT Troubleshooting and Configuration by Robert Reinstein et al. I am an et al. And in this book, I wrote how to set up DHCP for Windows NT and TCP/IP and connectivity with Linux. In here, basically how to telnet. Michael Tressler graduated from Ball State University in 1993 with a bachelor's degree in computer science. There you go. It's in a book, so it happened. For the past 4 years, he's been a Windows NT consultant, helping several of the largest companies in Indiana and the Midwest with Windows NT support. He is now the co-owner of Intermix Systems, a company whose focus is the internetworking of Windows NT with legacy systems. There you go. That was my bio in 1997. Anyway, Windows NT 3.5.1, networking, moving my way up. Exchange. So then, a decent-sized real estate company in the Midwest. I ended up working for them. And then I learned WAN technologies. So I was the networking guy. I was the guy who brought in the Windows NT in the first place. They were maybe the first customer I ever had with Windows NT, and they stuck with it. So then I learned WAN technology as I started setting up CSU, DSUs. And we had a modem bank for people to dial in, 56K, a little US Robotics modem bank. The cool thing about that is it was ISDN lines feeding it, and then it was a T1 via ISDN, and then the US Robotics split it up to different channels. So at home, I had a 128K ISDN connection. I was the boss. Y'all want to play Dune? Not even Dune. What was it? Was the one after that? It was actually multiplayer. It's come on over.
Yeah.
I got the internet, baby. I got 128K. Y'all sucking at 56K, which we really know is 48K. So
Yeah. I remember the jump from 33K to 56. That was like the fast thing.
oh, wasn't it though? And there was no sound effects. It just like boom connected. It was beautiful. I was cool. Did the firewalls there as well. Early days, we brought in Microsoft Mail and then flipped that to the first version of Exchange. That migration was horrible. Horrible. Microsoft had no migration. One of the senior guys there at the real estate company, he took over that role of handling the imports. He wrote it out as 83 steps. That includes, like, click OK. All right, that's one of the steps.
Yeah.
It was like 83 steps. There was no, like, point at the MS Mail post office and suck it all in and then maybe, do some manual map the user to the mailbox or something, right? Just a quick click. This goes there, this goes there, this is their Windows NT. This is pre-Active Directory, but still, this is their Windows NT ID. None. So anyway, started doing Exchange, firewalls. Left that company, went to another one in Indianapolis, a small banking operation. They were the first IB, first internet bank. They were the first internet bank based out of Indiana, doing firewalls for them, doing the WAN. Learned how the WAN failover routers work, IP redirects to get to one or the other machine, F5 load balancers, got into all that. And then was just generalist IT as well. So I would help with Exchange. I think we had Active Directory by this. I think at this point we're into 2004 or 5, whatever. We're into Active Directory, easily into that. And then one day I'm sitting there doing nothing because we were really good. Because we had gotten purchased then by a company out of Connecticut. And we in Indianapolis did a real good job of pushing them off as much as we could so we could just sit there and watch football games or play fantasy football or whatever. He goes, "Hey, Mike, we got this LCS thing. You're going to get the OCS upgrade." I'm like, "I don't know anything about it." He goes, "It can't be hard. How hard can it be?" All right. Okay, cool. It was hard. It was very hard. We had a consultant. So fortunately, they're like just all the firewall stuff, and OCS wanted every single port on the planet. Yep. And 4 different admin interfaces. So it wasn't all just in one OCS panel. It was you had to go here, you had to go to the Windows NT settings, you had to go to this command line thing. It was all over the place. So we got about 75 people migrated from LCS to OCS with calling, by the way, to add to the fun. This was OCS 2007 R2, so we did have calling enabled. We had heard then, we were about 3 or 4 months into the project that the upgrade called Link was coming out. And I just told my boss, "Hey, can we just pause this? Because in 2 months, Link is coming out, so let's just wait, upgrade to Link. It's supposed to be so much better. Let's wait, migrate to that, and go." So we did. We waited, migrated from OCS to Link. Also not easy, but fortunately we only had 75 people on OCS because LCS wasn't heavily used either. Yeah. LCS was more of a trial thing for 15 to 20 people. Moved to Link. That was a couple long days and nights, mostly in the work design, and then the final cutover. Because again, we have 75 people's phone numbers. And some of them, unlike us nowadays, some of these people
actually use their phones back then. Yeah, it was actually a really big deal to do on these phones. Yeah.
So we cut it over and everything went well. And that was my intro into Link. And there were a couple people, some of them still in the industry, some not anymore, that had blog articles that were really useful, but they were all over the place. And I didn't want to check 17 websites once or twice a week. So I don't know if you remember my little news aggregator.
I do.
See now is how it ended up. So that's where that news aggregator started, is I created all that, then created an app for Windows Phone for that app. I finally killed it. I don't keep up with it anymore. A few people have reached out going, "Oh, whatever happened?" I'm like, sorry. There's a whole new world of
because all the blogs cycle as well, don't they? So you have to keep up with the sourcing.
It was all blogs then. Now there's a lot of YouTube, 2 TikToks I've seen, but it's all YouTube. More live forums, more live events. There were none back then. There were no webinars or anything like that. I just lost interest. That's the reason. That's the reason it died. Anyway, so then upgraded from Link to Skype. We did the Skype update. Had it out on LinkedIn, I think, that I knew SBAs. And I got a hit from a recruiter to say, "Hey, do you want to move to Deloitte in Nashville?" Did an interview. Apparently, they only found 2 people who knew even how to spell SBA, Survivable Branch Appliances. And apparently, the other person they interviewed basically knew how to spell it, but had zero experience, didn't know what it was. I was raw with SBAs, but I had implemented 3 of them. I know one in Chicago, one in New Jersey, and one somewhere
You were
else.
probably one of about 50 or 100 people that had done it at that point.
On the planet, right? And then they gave me an offer financially I couldn't refuse. So then I moved from Indianapolis to Nashville, did SBAs for 3 years, and almost exclusively enterprise voice. That led to writing the book. Writing the book was weird and fun and crazy. It's because every time you sit there writing, you have no idea is someone who's going to release the same thing. And just because I like them, I'd still buy them. The Skype Unleashed and Skype for Business Unleashed.
I did a chapter for Unleashed.
So I'd look at them like, how deep are they getting into calling? How deep are they going? Okay, it's one solid 30-page chapter, really solid, but yeah, I'm going to do 250 pages. So it's a race, and then at other times you're like, man, I just need to get away from this thing. So I did all the writing in my own time, because you get into that situation, can Deloitte claim authorship and ownership of it? So I made a point that I never did anything except for evenings and weekends. So then you lose your evenings and weekends. But I learned so much so I first started writing that book like 3 years before, and I thought I had like 2.5 chapters done. I'm like, this won't be hard. I'll just write 5 more chapters, call it a day. No, I had an intro and part of chapter 1 done, and part of chapter 1 had so many mistakes because I'd learned so much more. I'm like, I got to start from scratch. That got me the Skype for Business books. That's where it is. It's now unpublished. You can't buy it anymore except for aftermarket, just because it's gotten sold. I don't even know if that site's still up. Enterprise Voice Skype for Business. That was a webpage for the book. I think I posted the PDF there for free downloads. If anybody wants it, email me. It is empowering to cloud an archive of old books.
Yeah, if you want a history lesson in Skype for Business.
And I'm not great at Teams calling, but what I've heard is that most of the Skype stuff applies to Teams calling.
A lot of the fundamentals still there. It was the same team that built the voice architecture, basically. Yep. But just so much easier and different these days than when we were busy deploying servers, multiple roles, and
a lot less PowerShell.
Yeah. A lot less Windows Fabric, which was always fun.
Oh, the joy of spending a long weekend or a long Wednesday evening when Windows PowerShell errored, and you run the commands and then it didn't solve it. Then you open a case. Now you have a global outage because at Deloitte it was 40,000 users using our Skype pools. So that's a quality outage. And then we had SBAs. Fortunately, the SBAs generally continued working for local calling, which is the whole point of a survival branch appliance. If the parent pool dies, they can at least make and receive phone calls still.
How did you get from that big architecture at Deloitte over to Microsoft?
We're having a Christmas time lunch. A couple of Deloitte coworkers, hey, you know what? Let's blow off and have a 2 or 3 hour lunch and maybe come back to work. So we went to this burger joint in East Nashville and had burgers and a beer or two. And as people got going up to the restaurant, I just grabbed my phone and checked, because now we have phones that actually do stuff as opposed to way back when. The Windows Phone was great, RIP. And I checked my phone. There's an email, and it's from Microsoft Recruiting. And I showed it to my coworker at the time. Do you think this is legit or is this spam? He reads it and goes, that's legit, and I would respond. So I did, and after 2-3 months of the interview cycle, I joined Microsoft in MCS Consulting. The book I brought up to my future boss during the interview thing. It's like, hey, I'm about to release this book. How does this tie in with Microsoft? Can I do this? Blah, blah, blah. And he just looks at me and goes, if you release it the day before you start, it's not a problem. So I released it the day before I started, and then it wasn't done with all the proofing and editing. So the first people who bought the book in the first month, there are errors, and there's an addendum on the website with all the corrections, about 30 corrections. The good thing about using Amazon, the Kindle Publishing, whatever it's called, is that you can just send a new manuscript, and the books were printed on demand. So it wasn't like, I'm going to fund 500 and hope I sell it. They were printed on demand.
I've got a physical copy somewhere. I don't know where. I don't think it was first month, so I probably got one with less typos.
There are a few people that had the first copy. And so when I pulled the book from resale, I had him print one last copy because I only had the sample copy. I never had a final book. So I think I should have 2 copies somewhere. Anyway, so then I joined Microsoft. And that was a little disappointing because I never did. Oh, by the way, through all that Skype stuff, I think I was known as FlinchBot. So everything was at FlinchBot. I didn't go to any conferences because I couldn't afford it. And there was like Link Conference.
Yeah,
I did go to the second Link Conference in Vegas.
Yeah, I think the first time we met, you were already at Deloitte by that point. In one of the
that would have been the second Link Conference. If we met, that would have been there. So I was pretty anonymous. A lot of people were like, does this person even exist? Who is this person? If you really wanted to care, you could do a lookup, whoisflinchbot.com, see Michael Tressler, person in Nashville, Tennessee or whatever. when I joined Microsoft, I then realized I probably need my name now as opposed to just the handle. So then I started using my real name. A lot of times, a lot of people then were like, holy crap, you're FlinchBot? I'm like, yeah, disappointing, isn't it? And then at Microsoft, the first 2-3 years were a little disappointing because I did zero Skype or Link stuff. Almost none. I did one, which was really nice, in Des Moines, Iowa. Spent 8 weeks there. They were like, hey, our Skype for Business isn't as stable as we'd like. And it was cool because I got to talk to the firewall people, the router people, the Wi-Fi people, the server people, the client who makes the client images, all of them had reports and charts, and ended up giving like a 30-page report with graphics and charts and whatever with priorities. These are the high priority things you should focus on first. Here are the lower priority things. And then here's just like best practice stuff that you aren't doing. It won't make a tangible change to the reliability of the system, but maybe your operations can improve. That was the only thing I did in 2 or 3 years that was Skype or Link at all. I did a Windows 7 migration for the IRS.
Oh, that sounds dull.
Talk about easy money. Get a government gig. I found an obscure bug. For people who are hard of hearing or blind and have to use the keyboard navigation, accessibility, it skips a menu on the accessibility during using the keyboard. That's the bug I found. Obscure. And it was like in the help system, so it wasn't even the main ones, but whatever, I found it. We submitted it. I don't know if it got fixed. Anyway, then I did a year, traveled about 42 times in the year, and I like travel. So that was the network performance assessment that we did at Microsoft. So that was Microsoft 365. So at least I'm getting to cloudy stuff now. I'm getting off premises. And the NPA, a customer would take 5 laptops, throw them at 5 different locations in their organization, headquarters, a factory, a office in China, an office in India, 2 offices in Germany, whatever. And it would just sit there for a week collecting data. So I think at that point there was a Skype assessment tool, network assessment tool, which we would automate and run every 5 minutes. And it would ping Skype, make a Skype phone call, whatever. We'd collect that data, upload a file to OneDrive every hour, and then download the file. So after 5 days, we got all this data. I'd go on site to collect the data, give them some training on how Office 365 networking works, which if you've seen the Teams Rooms Windows training that I did, the boot camps back then, Module 2 is how does Office 365 networking work? Having done a year of NPAs directly led to 1, me wanting to put that module into the curriculum, and 2, being qualified to speak to it. So it worked out. Anyway, so I did that for a year. And by the way, we're heading into COVID. About November of that year, Yoav Barzilai, you probably know Yoav. If not, a lot of people do. For those who don't know, he was a Skype guy back in the day, also a blogger. Yoav without a zero, I think was his name, was the blog, or Yoav with a zero? Yoav with a zero. Then he started switching to do a lot of Surface Hub blogging. So Yoav was a guy, so we both joined Microsoft within a year or 2 of each other, kept in touch. He was asked, do you want to create the curriculum for Teams Rooms Windows? Because the problem was, in device partner sales at Microsoft, the partners were coming back saying, we'd love to sell Teams Rooms Windows. We don't know how it works. And if we don't know how it works, and if our engineers and installers don't know it, we're not going to sell it. So it was a blocker to sales. So Yoav somehow was involved, but at the same time, Yoav was heavily contemplating a move to the United States to join the Surface Hub team. So he decided he'd rather do Surface Hub, which was the right call. Today, as we sit here with our feet on the ground, where it's Teams Rooms and some mythical Surface Hub 3.
Yes, it's all come full circle.
They asked him, hey, do you know anyone else who could do this, right? If you're going to leave us with this project, and he mentioned me. And so they, air quotes, interviewed me, and then I took over. What he hadn't done much, right? Because it was just, he picked it up like after 2 or 3 weeks of some basic research. He then said, look, I'm going to go to the Surface Hub team. I can't do this. Then myself and a guy named Nate Smyer. I knew Nate from Nashville. He was in the Teams users group there. One of those things, I moved from Nashville to St. Petersburg, Florida, and Nate reaches out to me and goes, hey, do you want to buy my speakers? He's a big audiophile. He makes his own speakers. One of those kind of people. Literally, he's got pictures with the vice grips, clamps for the wood case that he built. Not just attaching speakers to a case. He built the case himself, all of that. He says, hey, you want some of these? I'm like, man, I just moved to St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm in an apartment. I can't. No. Like, if I were moving into a house, sure. And he's like, wait, what? You moved to St. Petersburg, Florida? Yeah. He goes, I'm moving there next month. I'm like, cool. He's like, where'd you move to? I point like the apartment I was in. He goes, yeah, I'm moving a block away. So unbeknownst. So Nate and I have known each other for a while. It's one of those deals where I did 80% of the work on the Teams Rooms Windows thing. Nate only did one module, so 1 out of 12 on it. No, it ended up being 25%. I'm like, his contribution was meaningless. Only 25%. Why do I bring him up? It was the hard 25%. I did the 75% in the same amount of time he did the 25%, because that was the modules 6 and 7.
Yeah, which
security
bits did
ones.
you do then?
The security modules. God bless the Teams Rooms team, but they hadn't formally thought or documented a lot of this stuff. It was in-house tribal knowledge, and we had to convert it to public, easily accessible knowledge. The resource account. You can blame Nate and myself for calling it the Teams Rooms Windows resource account. If you hate it, which I know one person who does, they should be something else, like the device account, you have a fair argument. But we looked at docs back then. I'm like, what's the name of this account? Because we've got to train people on how to create this account. There were 3 different names for the same account in docs. So they had never formalized in the Teams Rooms Windows thing. So we picked the one, it's an Exchange resource account, really. And it just signs into Teams Rooms. So that's why it's called a resource account, because it's an Exchange resource account. Nothing wrong with device account. I think Surface Hub team uses device account for their name. So yeah, Nate was working with some people in the financial industry, and they were deploying Teams Rooms Windows. He was getting hit constantly with these questions. He ended up knowing some of the people asking those questions and sitting on calls with the Teams Rooms leadership and the IT leadership or whatever, security at the bank, and him. So he then I'll write the training modules for that. Intune conditional access, that stuff was never documented or heavily even tested. Yet everybody was using it. So the first stabs at it, Nate did. And then there was a tech community article. I forget the name of the Microsoft guy who wrote it. Those were the first stabs at trying to formalize all that. That's when the first boot camps came out. These questions were coming in. I'd never used Teams Rooms Window or Skype or Link room systems before. So I was very new to it. So we did the first boot camp. These questions were coming out. I'm like, what the hell's an EDID? What's an EDID minder? These people are asking questions, but I don't even know what that is. I do now. Date and I did it mostly, and there were some contributions from others, but those are the 2 of us were the main ones. From about February through May, and then we did the boot camp in June or July. So I had 6 months experience, but never in production. And then you get these AV guys like Harold Steindl and some of these other guys running around just have lived this for 30 years. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. I've never heard it.
But it's different worlds coming together, isn't it? It's your heritage in networks and infrastructure and LTS and OCS, and it all comes together. But now you've got the AV world coming into our world as well. That's all new to me as well. You talk to AV people, and it's a whole different science over on that side as well.
Yeah, a computer is not a computer; it's a codec. It's not what is the Dell or whatever, the ThinkSmart or wherever that's running the room system. It's what's the codec? That's a ThinkSmart core. It's a Intel NUC. A codec? What the hell's a codec? Isn't a codec a software piece that turns like music into an MP3? Isn't that what a codec does? It does, but back in the day.
Yeah.
And to your point, my whole experience that I went through where I glossed over some, I did networking and firewalls and Exchange and Active Directory and DNS. That's one thing I really liked about Skype and Link is that you had to know all of that. You had to know how the firewall worked and how edge servers worked and how do you set up all the DNS entries.
And you had to be able to interface with all those different teams. You had to be able to talk the firewall people's language. You had to be able to talk to the security team. You had to talk to the identity team. Like all of those teams would you engage with on a project. It was a real complex piece. It was good fun when it was in the glory days.
Yeah, I liked it because you had to know a little bit about everything in IT. We have new user accounts. How do you automate giving them Skype rights? What groups do they need? Do they need a phone number? How do you automate all that? So now you're working with a whole HR system to try to automate things. I know at Deloitte, we would scan the OU looking for new accounts and then just automate them like 4 times a day. And usually people didn't start for a week or 2 after that account was created, so it worked out fine. But so we didn't interface directly with it. We kind of brute forced it, but it worked fine. That's where we're at. Teams Rooms Windows, boot camps. Kept doing all of that, and then Teams Rooms Android got released. And then I'm like, how do I fit Teams Rooms Android into the Teams Rooms Windows training and just call it Teams Rooms? Because there's a lot of similarities, but there's a ton of differences.
Yeah, I'd say there's more differences than similarities, if we're honest.
So I'd started trying to figure out how to create one module then, like Teams Rooms Android. Okay, you learned all this Teams Rooms Windows stuff. Teams Rooms Android, we still use a resource account. We still use a lot of the same stuff. I don't have to go through the features. We've already discussed what casting is or whatever. We've already discussed all that. So I start on that. And then people know people, and somebody said this guy named Tony Woodruff is working on a Teams Android training for phones. I had given the thought that what if I just punt making a Teams Rooms thing and just make Teams Android devices generic training. So Tony and I then became best friends. I mean, we had already known each other. We'd met in person at Microsoft Ready, which is an internal Microsoft conference, a year or two before. So we already knew each other, but we weren't talking on a daily basis. Like we ended up. So Tony and I wrote the Teams Android devices training. I think that also broke out the way Nate and mine did, and that I did 75% of it. Tony did 25% of it, but he got the fun part, the Intune conditional access piece and security, which wasn't codified either, whereas the rest of it was pretty well, here's how you make a phone call. Here's how you set up whatever. There's docs articles for it, but there were no docs articles on Android open source platform, AOSP and kiosk mode and that stuff. Tony got to figure all that out. I just took screenshots of the interface and explained what they were. Tony had to create new knowledge, essentially. So
awesome.
Then we did the boot camp. Then we did Android devices boot camp. And then life happens. And Jabra reached out and said, hey, you should join our team. I had known already Mickey Haley from Jabra. She's one of the people that handles the Jabra Microsoft relationships. The summer before, I guess it's been a year ago, she NDA'd me that Jabra was releasing an Android bar, Teams Rooms Android device.
Yeah, so let's hang on. Let's dive into that. So first of all, what's your role at Jabra now? You should know it by now.
I was going to make up a name. Nothing funny popped into my head. Senior solutions consultant, though, and maybe now senior channels consultant, channel solution. I don't know. I go by senior solutions consultant. I work with a guy named Sharath Abraham, and he has senior channel consultant or something different. My job, regardless of what the title is, pre-sales technical support, helping customers understand what our products are. Even, hey, Jabra makes video cameras. For those who don't know Jabra, we're one of, if not the largest seller of headsets, contact center, hybrid workers, that sort of thing. So
yeah, real specialists in audio, loads of medical audio, like hearing aids and all that.
Hearing aids,
super well known brand for audio, but pushing aggressively into video, especially when you consider the timelines. So first on Windows with the P50, and now into Android, which I want to talk about.
Before that, the OG Panicast, which is 180-degree field of view tiny guy. Then that, people are like, okay, the video is cool. Can you add speaker and microphone in? That's where the Panicast 50 came in then, with the speakers, microphone, and all that. So my job is to explain what it does to customers, how it works, do lunch and learns with customers, get on customer calls. Generally not once they've purchased them. That becomes a support function because everybody bought it, but doesn't mean that doesn't happen either. Often the channel is, hey, you know what? I don't want to open a support case. This seems like a simple question. Can it do this? Hey, the customer's asking, what does the port on the back do, and can they use it for that or whatever? Okay, we'll respond to those. But if it's like, hey, this thing isn't working, or this feature doesn't work, or we're having trouble doing this, open a support case. Yeah. That's post-sales support. I am in the channel side. I was originally jack of all trades. As we've grown the group, everybody did everything. So by jack of all trades would mean, hey, I would talk to Microsoft. Microsoft's looking to buy some. And then I would also talk to Ingram, TD Synnex, AVI SPL, AVI Systems, the channel partners, either distributors or integrators. And I really liked talking to that. At Microsoft, technically, I was on the channel side, the partner side. All the boot camps were meant for the partners so they could learn how to use them so they could sell more. So it was always partner side. And as our group has grown and matured, let's say, there are now two of us that do channel only, and there are two of us that do end customer only, though we still cross streams. So Rob Houston was at a channel event just because Sharath Abrahams. Can you believe he didn't want to travel the weekend of his daughter's first birthday? So Rob Houston came. So we do crossover, and we got this call with Microsoft or one of our other customers. But my primary focus in a lot of the travel lately is to channel partners.
Awesome. And let's dive into that kind of Jabra video story. So you say there was the camera, then there was the P50 bar, and now you've just GA'd the first Android bar. So what was the motivation there to jump into the Android game as well as the Windows?
The Panicast 50, the one that has been out for 2 years, almost exactly 2 years now, is USB only, which is great because it can connect to your laptop, it can connect to a Mac, it can connect to Barco and Airtame and Mersive and Crestron Air Media and all of those kind of wireless sharing things. It can connect to Teams Room's Windows. It can connect to Zoom Room. It can connect to whatever. It's a USB peripheral. A really good USB peripheral, but it's just a USB peripheral so that it's extremely flexible. The problem is you need, and I'll use the AV term, a codec to drive it. It sends video and something needs to catch that video and do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like a laptop. The Teams client catches that video off the USB port and then pushes it into the meeting or whatever. Just like we went from the original Panicast, customers were like, hey, that'd be cool if it was an all-in-one bar. Customers also came back and said, you know what'd be cool? If we didn't have to bring in an external codec, an external compute module. If we didn't have to bring in anything else. So it's okay, we can do an all-in-one. It's already a fairly mature market on the Android side. Microsoft is doing a good job of trying to add a bunch of new features. So that's where it came from, was our fanboys and fangirls were like, but if this could be an all-in-one that was absolutely an all-in-one, wouldn't that be awesome? So that's where that came from.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that makes sense from what's in the market, which is people are wanting to scale out these rooms, install them easier, simpler, faster. So like screen, bar, job done, basically.
And then as people are refitting their conference rooms, a lot of the small ones, you put a table against the wall. Only our camera can show the whole room. Everyone else, there's the corners. If you imagine where the monitors are hanging on the wall, if you put the camera above or below the monitor, those corners are invisible to almost every camera on the market except ours. So in a small room, you could then slide in extra
seats. That's because really you're stitching together 3 cameras, aren't you? So you've got cameras that have that width.
For those who don't know, it's a 180-degree field of view. Most of the cameras in the AV marketplace are anywhere from 90 to about 110. I think there's some 120s running around. 120-degree field of view. The human eye, I believe, according to the Wikipedia article, is 190-degree field of view. So if you take your 2 hands and put them like parallel or whatever, horizontal, perpendicular, whatever, with your eyes, you can see your hands. That is what our camera does. It can see that full range around. So it can see from the side all the way around to the other side. It does that by using 3 cameras. We're getting nerdy here. Each camera has roughly...
We can go deep. It's good.
Let's go deep. Each individual camera, it's a 13-megapixel 4K camera, all 3 of them, but they only have an 80-degree field of view. 80 degrees times 3 is 240 degrees. So what do we do with 180 degrees? We overlap. The cameras overlap so that we can have full coverage. So it's not like you jump to another camera. We actually real-time stitch the image together. And so that 240 degrees ends up being 180 degree usable when you overlap the things. The overlap also, and here's getting nerdy, the overlap isn't static. So it doesn't mean, okay, 30 or 20 degrees from one camera overlaps with 20 degrees of another, or 15 degrees overlaps. We can do a 0 and 30 degree, or 30 degree and 0. So we can move the seam to try to keep a person on one camera as possible. Because once you get into the seam and you have to stitch things together, it's hard to tell visually when you're between seams. When you're walking around, it's, no pun intended, seamless. However, just the math and the AI required, you have a better image if you can have a person locked into just one camera.
Yeah, and typically once you're settled down in a conference, you're not always jumping about. So actually that makes a load of sense.
Now, what happens if 2 people are half on the seam? That's for the AI. That's for our developers to figure out. And we're still constantly working on improving the algorithm, making smoother transitions.
You're doing a lot as well. You're really at the front in terms of the multi-stream stuff, in terms of the intelligent speaker being baked into the bar. So it feels like from not being a video company, you're very quickly putting in the leading features.
So we kind of used the cheat code and bought a company called Altea Systems several years ago. So that's because I asked Mickey when I first saw this. I'm like, hey, Mickey, how the hell did Jabra suddenly get good at video? Like, usually you see a single camera, and then you start seeing a portfolio grow, and then finally after the 5th camera, you're like, oh, they got it right. This one's awesome. Yeah. And Jabra just jumped right ahead to not only do we have it right, but the market-leading camera. So they bought Altea. And what was your question?
It seems the level of investment you have in video, where you're like, one of the first devices to be talking about multi-stream, one of the first devices to have intelligent speaker built into the bar.
So when they designed the Panicast 50, and to a little extent, this Panicast, this little guy has intelligent zoom capability, so it can find the leftmost and rightmost person and zoom into them. Because at 180 degrees, the cool thing is you see the whole room. The downside is you see the whole room. So if I'm looking at a conference room that only has 2 people in it, do I really need to see the plants on the side? No, I just really want to just zoom in on those 2. So when they designed the Pentacast 50, they put 8 AI chips for different video and audio processing, plus core processors and all that. So there's a lot of intelligence at the hardware level built into those things. So as Microsoft releases multi-stream, where will probably be the second one, the Yealink S60, which Microsoft helped develop, is first. Will be the first bar to do intelligent speaker. If you guys don't know what this stuff is, go to empowering.cloud. There's plenty of information on what is intelligent speaker and what is multi-stream. If not, there will be soon.
It's all there.
So, the first front of room all-in-one to do intelligent speaker. As it is now, it's 3 speaker pucks that have to be on the table. We solve for not having to run a USB cable to a table. Running things to tables can be a challenge. So now you can do intelligent speaker without having to run cables. We're adding in virtual walls. So again, our camera sees everything. So if there's glass walls, it sees people outside the conference room. Coming really soon is our intelligent speaker feature, kind of virtual walls. So now, like you see it, I was at a conference with the camera. When there's 400 people walking around, there's somebody always at 180 degrees left and 180 degrees right. So you can't really demo intelligent zoom. It'll be really cool to say, hey, our booth is 3 meters wide by 4 meters deep. Only zoom in on people in that 3x4 space, even though there's 200 people milling around. Yeah. Ignore them.
This is the stuff that's because of what Microsoft are doing with Copilot and Teams Premium. Like, we're going to have more technology in the rooms to get transcripts, to get the framing. I'm really excited about multi-stream being able to give us intelligent edge, multiple streams as well.
Yeah, it's fun to work at a company that the camera's 2 years old, and we're still one of, if not the lead partner with Microsoft. We're the first company to come out with a feature in about a year or two, a device that does intelligent speaker. It's been the same 3 for at least a year. No one else has put one out. And there probably wasn't a reason to put one out because intelligent speaker was super niche. But now with Copilot and Teams Premium meeting recap, it's no longer going to be super niche. Normies like us can take advantage of intelligent speaker now.
Yeah, I've seen a big peak in, there's a point to this now, and it's Copilot, basically. Like, well, we're going to need decent transcripts. Whereas before, like you say, it was a kind of a nice to have potentially, but it was
primarily for regulated users, those people who have to write down every single phone call they make, that have to have every email tracked and whatever. I guess we're explaining intelligent speaker now. When they walk into a conference room, how do we know that Tom Arbuthnot said that and not Michael Tressler? Because Tom is a regulated user. We don't care about Michael. But that's okay. And we need a transcript. We have to have a transcript of the meeting for legal reasons. What intelligent speaker does is, and I'm skipping a lot of steps here, Tom, the regulated user, goes into his Teams client, reads a paragraph, and it makes a biometric voice print. And then if he's invited properly to the meeting, he walks into the conference room, Tom starts speaking, and the transcript doesn't say a person or speaker 1 in conference room A said this. It says Tom Arbuthnot in conference room A said that. Or regulated users, all his communications or her communications are still tracked. So that's intelligent speaker. Where that leads to with Copilot and all that Tom was alluding to is with that transcript now, that is what Copilot uses and Intelligent Meeting Recap can use to give you a summary of, hey, these are the notes from the meeting, these are tasks. And instead of saying, somebody said, I'll be responsible for the garbage committee, it's Tom Arbuthnot said he'd volunteer for the garbage committee. Hypothetical party. Yeah. I'm helping run an Oktoberfest right now, so that's just one of those tasks that no one wants to do. But we have people. Michael volunteers to be on the beer drinking committee, as opposed to a user volunteered to be on the beer drinking committee. So that provides real power. And then the Teams Premium Intelligent Meeting Recap can summarize all that, know exactly when in the conference room when Tom spoke or when Michael spoke in the conference room. You always know the remote users because they have their own identity in Teams, so it knows where it came from. In the conference room is the problem.
That's awesome. You've got eyes on what Jabra are doing. Is there anything you can share that you're particularly excited about, either on the Android side or on the Windows side? I wanted to dig into the Microsoft Android potentially being interesting. You might be the first guys to that as well.
Yeah, so at Enterprise Connect, there was an announcement that Microsoft is going to offer an Android for Teams devices. And that's all I know, honestly. Internally, I haven't even seen a test build, so I don't know what all it entails. I can only repeat the press release. Not legally, it's just, that's all I know.
Yeah.
It's early days. We don't expect to see it. Again, I'm not in engineering, so don't hold me to any of these dates, but first half of next year, 2024, is where I think it's going to land, hopefully sooner than later, but it's out of our hands at Jabra. It's Microsoft writing the Android. When are they going to be ready to support it? There's a whole support channel and docs articles and a whole thing when Microsoft introduces essentially a brand new operating system, which it is, because it's not Windows. It's not the Android for Duo, the phone. It's an Android for devices. It's going to be a fresh build, a new tree, a new fork off of Android.
I think that's going to be really interesting because I've definitely heard customers that want someone to be accountable for the Android, and they ideally want Microsoft to be accountable for the Android. So
and it's so great. Microsoft creates the Android. What problem does that solve? A couple. One, does your security department, Tom at empowering.cloud, when you go to your security department, when someone says, I have a product, the same product, one is from a company named Jabra who released their first operating system 1 month ago, or option B is a product from a company that released their first operating system 45 years ago.
I have good friends at Jabra, so I trust in Jabra inherently. But if I was not me, might be tempted to say I probably would sign off on Microsoft too.
At Enterprise Connect, when that came out, Eric Taylor said he had a conversation and a customer was like, yeah, we're not interested in Android. And he said, what if Microsoft wrote the Android? They're like, oh, keep talking. Do tell. Because really for that exact reason, there's fragmentation. And all of them do a great job, but Neat writes their own Android. Logitech writes their own Android. Audio Codes write their own Android. Bose is responsible for their own Android. Poly is responsible for their own Android. I don't want to list them all off. I'm going to forget some. Crestron's got a bar coming out.
14 we're up to. 14.
Yeah, which one am I missing? Sorry, apologies. It's not personal who I've missed. Anyway, so you've got all these different Androids, all with different features, all at different versions. And Tom, you've done a great job initially explaining what the Android lifecycle actually meant, that, hey, devices on Android 9, you have 2 years of support. Even if the hardware vendor says, we'll give you 3 years of support, the Android lifecycle, you tracked it down really well.
Yeah, it took a bit of tracking down. So obviously, Microsoft will only support the major versions of Android for so long connecting to Microsoft 365. So they give public timelines on docs, and it's up to the OEMs to keep upgrading the Android. But they can only upgrade as far as the chipset they chose to purchase and the Android open source project supporting that chipset. So it's a very convoluted three-way conversation between which chipset you chose, which major Android it supports, do you want to pay to test the major Android upgrade, all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the AV space or the room space just assume I'm buying a device, therefore I've got 3 to 5 years out of it, which depending on when in the life cycle you buy it, could be true or not. Microsoft will do reasonable endeavors support after that end of support date, but we haven't seen a device go through that yet, so we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah, they've extended it, and then all the vendors, to their glory, have pushed more Android updates. So if they initially launched on Android 8, they upgraded to 9, maybe to 10.
Yeah, we see
which extends the life cycle for each version.
Every time they jump the major, they go into the next kind of date band for support. So as long as you're working with an OEM that is committed to updating and puts in decent chipsets, you're going to get longer life.
And you have new enough equipment that can support it. So if you bought your Poly phone 4 years ago, if you bought your Poly phone last year or 2 years ago, you probably
this is the danger. You need to know what you're doing. We do a lot of research on this to make sure you know when in the life cycle you're buying a device. And it's hard sometimes because you're buying from another distie who might not know that intricate detail as well. So it's important to be informed. But yeah, it's interesting to see you guys being one of the first people potentially to have that Microsoft Android OS and how that impacts the market.
Yep, and I've heard 2.5 other vendors, just reading the tea leaves, that are interested in this as well. There's no requirement today to go there. So I know Logi has, and I'm not saying Logi isn't one of the 2.5, okay? I'm not giving any secrets away. Yeah. But Logi's done a great job promoting Collab OS, their Android version, as a competitive advantage.
Yeah, and like you said, Microsoft are not forcing people at all. If you're an OEM who wants to manage your own Android, absolutely, that's going to be fully supported. It's just an option. Logi
wants to move forward. Look, Microsoft Android doesn't let us do these 4 things, which our customers love. They can stay Collab OS. And they've been around long enough that they've had enough security discussions that people now, hey, they've been doing it, 4 years, 3 years? And they have enough in market that they may just stay Collab OS. But there are other ones like Jabra. We're a headset and camera company. We're not an operating system company. We had to spin up an operating system team for this. Boy, it'd be nice if we could take some of those people and put them on things that provide more value directly to us and our customers. We will still need some because we have to write drivers to our camera, drivers to our speakers and microphones. We still have to do some core OS work, but at that point we basically support drivers, and Microsoft supports all the other stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting, definitely.
The other fun thing that hopefully this solves to an extent is that when Android features get released, it's often Neat and Yealink will have this feature on October 3rd, coming to Logitech November 3rd, coming to Poly November 12th. What is with all these delays? And that's because those will require firmware and OS updates from the vendors, and some in their development life cycle are earlier based on a given feature, and some are a little later. Some, like Logitech, always want to test the feature first and then wrap it into a firmware. So Logitech's always a little later, but they believe that provides for a more stable customer experience. So in this scenario, when Microsoft updates the Android, it'll have all the features at the OS level needed. And if we at Jabra have our drivers ready, if we need to update our drivers for that feature, we only have to worry about the drivers feature. So the hope is most OEMs, if they most go with Microsoft Android, will have features on the same day. Because you never see on Teams Rooms Windows, hey, Lenovo's get it on this date, Yealink's get it on that date, Poly get it on the other dates, Logitech's get it on 2 weeks later. It's, hey, we're pushing it in the next 3 weeks, everybody gets it.
Yeah, it'll be nice to see that uniformity, definitely. I think the security one is a big one as well. We'll see whether other OEMs follow, or, as you say, whether they like that independence of owning their own Android OS.
And then we'll see if there's one holdout, Microsoft may finally go, okay, you're the one. We'll give you a year or 2 years or whatever. You're causing us more heartache.
Yeah.
Figure out how to do your cool stuff on our build.
Awesome. I want to wrap this up by saying, on the pod, thank you for everything you're doing for the community as well. And your Empowering Cloud videos have been some of the top watched ones, all your voice ones. So really appreciate
that goes back to my Skype voice days. And I wanted to learn it myself how to do it. So I did 4 videos on how to connect Teams to the PSTN. If you don't know what PSTN is, so you can order a pizza from your Teams client. That's the way to do it. And Tom, we didn't talk about poetry or philosophy like you said we would.
I know, we're going to have to do a part 2. We were planning on the pod before, and we were going to do a poetry and philosophy special, but we've ended up talking about IT and Android, so maybe...
more life, the universe, and everything, a little less vogue on poetry.
Next pod, though. Next pod, you'll have to come back.
Go. Awesome. Thanks, Tom. This is fun. It's always great seeing you, and look forward to seeing you soon, whenever the next time is going to be.
Appreciate it. Cheers, Michael.